I understand that you devote like a lot of energy, a lot of time to explore this field, and I'm just at the beginning of the path that you that you are many years. And but personally, I was very connected to transcendent states, but it took me some time just to accept it and like to go to this fully, because my previous life was not connected to it at all. So the purpose of this interview is to continue this quest and enjoy this quest of trying to get what is transcendent state, its nature, what is it like, the boundaries, and your perspective on how you see it. Dissolve some myths about this topic, because now it's much more trendy. There are so many means how to get to this transcendence experience, but not states. And I also feel that there are starting to appear many false ways to it, and like there are a lot of misleading information now about this topic. So can you introduce yourself and tell us what made you to devote so much of your lifetime to this topic?
My name is Grant McFetridge, and I founded the Institute for the Study of Peak States back in the 1990s here in Canada. And it reflected a real passion that I had for the topic, even though my background is completely different. I used to do electrical engineering, research and development. I was a consultant in the field. I was an adjunct professor at Cal Poly, and I did that for over 20 years. But I ended up having a lifelong interest in this field, and I took those tools that I learned as an electrical engineer and applied it to this field, which is a bit different than most people do. The only exception I can think of right off the top of my head is Dean Radin, who works at the Institute for Noetic Sciences, and he also has a master's in electrical engineering. Yeah, so that's a bit of my background. As part of this process, I also got a doctorate in psychology to get a better handle on the field at the time. That was back in 2008. Okay, that's it.
Okay, and you, Dr. Kirsten?
Yes, my name is Kirsten Lykkegaard, and I have a medical science background. I am a doctor of veterinary medicine, and I have a PhD in pharmacology as well. And I spent actually over 17 years in medical research, which I enjoyed a lot, but I was searching still for more fundamental ways to find the root cause of diseases, and that's why I joined the Institute for the Study of Peak States, and I'm the Director of Research currently, and I'm also married to Grant.
Today my kid asked me, Mom, about what is your interview? And I understand there is no even, you invented this term peak states, but in general, there is no even one term that, you know, everyone agrees. There is transcendental, non-ordinary, altered states. So how you defined it and what do you mean by it?
Do you want me to?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, the dilemma that you're encountering has been a dilemma for a long time, you know, many decades. And when I got interested in this field, the concept of peak states didn't exist. So in other words, everyone was talking about peak experiences at the time or altered states. But what they meant was that you'd have a little glitch in your life for whatever reason. You took drugs or you climbed a mountain or something, and then you collapse back into normal. And that was the underlying assumption that everyone had. And it turns out that assumption's false. It turns out some people have peak states of consciousness that are continuous. They have them 24/7 and pretty much all their lives. But it was interesting to see that in the field that you're describing, that seems to be still the normal thinking, that people are just normal and they have momentary experiences of whatever. Would you agree or disagree?
So this is the question also for me. Are we designed to be like this? For me personally, this idea that it's like embodied this ability in us and it's our natural ability, it's very resonate. But like as researcher, I'm still questioning myself. Are we designed to experience all the time this, or we need some other parts of us? You know,
It
some
almost
like again like negative emotion.
that you're defining the transcendent state as something specific when you say that, because
Might be, yeah.
the normal consciousness, as in contrast to what you're saying, maybe that can be experienced, but it's not supposed maybe to be there all the time. What we talk about is optimum functioning of our biology, and from that space, actually, that you're supposed to have that all the time, because that's how your cells are supposed to function if they were let to have an optimum.
You could say it's the psychological equivalent of a biological experience, or the psychological outcome.
When something clicks in and you feel really at peace, for example, or like you're climbing a mountain and you feel at one with nature and all that moment in our experiences where biology inside of you functions at a more optimal level, and that could and should actually be happening all the time.
Strong, like we can see the negative emotion. It means that there is no optimal biological state at this moment, or I can experience some, you know, not positive, I mean, emotions and still be optimal.
Well, it's very interesting. If there are states of consciousness, we'll probably go into that later, where you can have feelings, but underneath it is a sense of peace. It's very strange because most people don't have that. They have a negative emotion, but under it, they just have a negative emotion. There is no under. But when you start to have these more optimal states, you have a sense of underlying peace when you have these feelings. Also, I would argue that if you're having rage and you can't feel any of these other states, then that suggests that the states aren't stable. That they're coming and going in your awareness. Whereas what we're talking about are ones that you can't get rid of.
Let's try to understand what is crucial, for example, for a person who doesn't know nothing about your concept. What is crucial to understand to get your concept? Like,
let me say, I also faced this dilemma when I started, 30 years ago. And I slowly came to realize that there are a lot of very independent states of consciousness. And this isn't something that, as a member of a Judeo-Christian society, that we normally gravitate to. In the Western society, there's a hierarchy based on Christianity. And you start with just ordinary people, and then you have priests, and then you have, angels, and then you got, Jesus, and then you've got God. And so it's kind of a corporate structure, as it were. That's completely obviously false, but emotionally, that's how we're raised in the Western societies. So Buddhists would look at you and go, well, that's nice, and just walk on, because they don't fit that model at all. What they're doing has nothing to do with the Western Christian tradition, okay? Or say, again, absolutely nothing to do with it. And so what we find in the West is we try and take everything and cram it into this little box that doesn't fit the data. And so, as myself being raised in the West, it took me a while to get rid of that conception and realize that there were a lot of very independent states of consciousness that had no relationship to each other. And in fact, different spiritual traditions were going in completely different directions. There wasn't some place where they would all come together in one thing. It wasn't the case. They were going in completely different directions. And what was even more interesting is each of those traditions felt their direction was the ultimate. And then you go to
the important
and the important one. And then you go to another tradition, and their endpoint was the key and the important one. And so you had this real mishmash of different traditions with different states. Once you start to realize there are different states that are unrelated, you can start to, I think, more clearly see what's going on.
Why you chose this name also for this phenomenon?
Well, it was actually based on peak experiences by Maslow. And I realized that you could have these experiences or they can be continuous and stable.
And the difference was whether you had a little bit of trauma, allowing you to sometimes that trauma falls away and you experience it non-trauma or trauma-free, you can say, that moment. So you have a peak experience because that trauma fell away. Or whether you have all the traumas gone and then you would not have it fall away, then it would be continuously stable. And you might not even notice yourself because if you were born with it, it's like a fish in water. And so you think, oh, how I feel is probably how you feel and that person feels, you know, how we project ourselves onto other people in sense of how we feel.
Yeah.
And so that was the discovery that Grant made, was that that's the distinction between the two, whether you have access to it once in a while or whether it's there as a constant, very solid feeling. Or not just feeling, but whatever it comes with this state.
It turns out happiness, for example, is a peak state. And everybody has met somebody who's just happy all the time, pretty much continuous. And we just think it's normal. They're rare, but I mean, all of us know someone like that. And yet for them, it's just a way of being that's just normal. So that's probably about 100 different peak states that a person can have.
And so the intensity can be also different.
Different states have different intensity, yeah, you could say that.
Because for me, it's also like, for example, my personal question. I experienced from my childhood this transcendent, but they were subtle, you know. All that I experienced was like on the edge of, it might seem or it may not. For example, versus a lot of my friends tried, you know, psychedelics and, you know, made ceremonies and everything where the experience is much more vivid. And I was kind of, how to say, doubting that what I feel is really something, if it's subtle, that it's something really true. And it took me time to realize that that it might be true, yeah. Even though I don't see, you know, hallucinations or don't hear voices or something, but I feel very connected, for example, at this moment.
Well, in our experience, peak states, you have no doubt. In fact, if you have doubt, it probably means if we're working with a person to give them a peak state, then we're failing or we've got an issue that we need to deal with. It should be strong and present and continuous.
For example, or wholeness, say wholeness. You feel whole, like complete, nothing is missing. That feeling, when that comes, you use the word whole without a doubt. It's like, it's not like, am I whole? Or, you know, you don't question it. It's like, I know inside, the knowledge of that is so strong. But I would say the subtleness, I mean, there can be things that are subtle that are still strong in their presence, that they're there all the time, but it's not a very, very profound, whatever it is, if that's what you mean. Subtle could also, in the way you said it, be that you actually, it's not totally stable. So you feel it, and then it wanes a little, and then you feel it again. So maybe there's just one trauma or something that, in our model anyway, that is keeping you from having it really strong, for example. There can be lots of reasons for things, and the way we put things into words signify or describes or give away some of the happening, whether it's with the solidness and all.
Yeah. When we're actually bringing people into peak states of consciousness, we use SUDs, subjective units of distress. We reverse it and we say, okay, are you at a 0 of this particular state or a 10? And then we work them up to a 10 and say, okay, let's try even more. Let's go to 11. And we just keep ramping up until it's not possible.
Until it's stable at 10, because if people are at 10 and you let go of whatever, they can crash it maybe down to a 6 or 7. That's the trauma still in there. That's keeping them being all the way.
And when we're done, they can't move it up or down. It's just locked into a maximum amount. Let me just address what you were asking. Why did I do it?
Yeah.
And it's kind of an interesting story. Unbeknownst to myself, I was born with what's called the beauty way state of consciousness. And a lot of my relatives had it also. And in that state of consciousness, everything is alive. You feel alive. The world is alive. You look inward for direction. You don't look outward to others. Spiritual truths are obvious. There's just a lot of pretty amazing qualities to this particular state of consciousness. And I thought it was normal, right? Because I was born with it. And
one is also that you don't have reactivity, so no traumas.
That's
in
true.
a sense, so that when the world bangs on you and your reaction is in the here and now and don't have that, so it has that underlying sense of calmness all the time.
And in fact, it was discovered by longitudinal research that there were some people who were just born unreactive to traumatic stressors, and they called them invulnerable children because this was done at a cohort of younger children as they watched them grow up. So a person in beauty way just simply doesn't experience trauma. They can have terrible things happen to them, but they just walk away from it going, well, that was shitty. And then they just go on with their lives. So anyway, I was born like this. And when I was 15, I worked at a scout camp, actually. And for the first time in my life, there were 3 people, other counselors, who also had this state of consciousness. Now, I'd never seen it outside of my own family. And this was an exciting experience to me. And they were able to show me that I could help others temporarily experience this way of being, maybe not fully, but at least to some degree. And I realized when I was 15 that this is something I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to give this to other people. Okay. But unfortunately, I had no idea really how to do it. The way we were doing it in the scout camp was through living outdoors in the forests and singing and a bunch of other stuff. But it wasn't stable. Full. And but in the back of my mind, as I went through my professional career and all the rest, I sort of wanted, how is it possible to give this to other people? And I'm afraid I just sort of decided it must be genetic, because my extended family, a lot of them had it, but I just hardly ever see it. Until one day when I was 29 and I was in a divorce, I lost my beauty state of consciousness. And it was very interesting because it was like being kicked out of heaven into hell. It was really terrible. But at the same time, I was really excited because it meant that this was not genetic. Because if it was genetic, I couldn't have lost it. So there was something else going on, which implied that it was something that people could acquire. I didn't know how, I didn't know what it was, but it meant that it was something I could actually figure out and give to people. And that started the Institute for the Study of Peak States. Very, very beginning step. So I was 29 years old.
Did it fully came back or no?
No, it was very interesting because at first I didn't know what the heck it was that I'd lost. So that's where I got involved in spiritual traditions and different practices and stuff like that, looking for someone who could explain to me what I'd lost and hopefully how to get it back. And it was, oh God, a number of years before I encountered Native Americans who could recognize what I was describing. And they called it walking in beauty or translation.
So your family had no connection with some spirituality or nothing?
Born that way.
Okay.
Born that way, yeah. But
Mhm.
it's so at any rate, years went by, and now I had a label for what I'd lost. But during this period, I was acquiring all kinds of other states of consciousness, ergo that long list that you see on the website, and trying to understand the dynamics, how all this stuff worked. It was years.
And you developed a way to heal trauma,
Hmm.
a way to regress, and a way, because his intuition was telling him that it had to do with trauma and prenatal trauma.
Yeah, that stage of consciousness where.
So these are the building blocks for where we are today. You can say he lost the state, he found that it wasn't genetic, he searched around, couldn't find anyone that knew what was going on, but had an intuition this has to do with trauma and it has prenatal parts in it, and you developed the tools for doing work in that field.
Yeah, exactly.
So what made you think that it's connected with prenatal traumas?
Well, it was intuitive. There was absolutely no evidence for this. And back in those years, back in the 90s, there just wasn't good tools for that. The whole field of prenatal psychology was.
Well, it had started to come,
It
right?
started, but it really hadn't. I mean, you had to search it out. Unfortunately, I was living in California, so I could search it out. This is pre-internet or just starting of the internet days. But yeah, I was following my intuition. Kirsten and I were just talking about this yesterday. I was reminding her that I was living in a little cabin in the mountains of California, and I actually retreated from talking to anyone because whenever I talk to someone, they say, no, that can't be right. Instead, you should go meditate with Guru, what's his name, or practice Zen over there, or, whatever they had, the technique du jour. But my intuition was saying prenatal trauma was where the key was. And I just had to walk away from everyone and just retreat and focus on that problem myself. And because I was doubtful also.
Which was, I guess, the key breaking point was that no one was actually able to tell you what had gone wrong and how to get it back. No one was an expert. Everyone was also searching and looking. And so finding that you have to do it yourself was, I think, key for you.
Yeah. But eventually, it took years. I developed tools and was able to prove the theory was correct. But it took almost a decade.
Intuition drives you, but how you get the proofs? It worked on you, or you did some research?
You have to understand, my background is electrical engineering, right? And I was paid a lot of money to solve other people's problems as an engineer, right? I was a consulting engineer. So when I finally realized that nobody knew the answer, and this took a while, right? A lot of different spiritual traditions and such. I realized that if no one knew the answer, I'd just start from scratch, and I would use the same tools and mindset that I used in engineering. And one of those was to develop a tool to do regressions to prenatal areas so I could research it, and also develop a tool that allowed me to heal prenatal trauma.
But see, the point was also that he had his model, his starting crude model was that it has to do, getting into those states or getting into the beauty way again, had to do with prenatal trauma. And so he had to invent the tools to make the research on that on himself.
Yeah. And other people, because it's not a good tool if I can't use it on other people.
Yeah.
And so that was what later became the wholehearted healing technique, which, by the way, I can't stand the name of, but it ended up sticking. So, but essentially it's a regression technique.
It's a regression technique to get to the trauma and actually heal it.
Prenatally.
And that's where I think you discovered, well, working on other people's traumas, that sometimes it would just be trauma healing, like pulling out needles from a wound, and boom, the wound healed immediately, the person felt better. And sometimes there was an added bonus for whatever regression that was in that trauma healing. had healed a moment of importance to a state, and the person would be, at the same time, it was like getting a, what we call a two for one. So you get healed on your trauma, but boom, you have now a state.
A peak state, yeah.
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 So we're starting to see that happening as well, adding to as validity to the model, saying that these peak experiences that you can have in a moment, they're not peak states yet because of trauma in a developmental event in prenatal life.
There was people doing great work in prenatal psychology. Groff was doing some great work. There were organizations looking at prenatal studies and such, but I was working pretty separate from that stuff, partly because of my engineering orientation, much more focused on measurement and results, and also because they didn't have any good tools. So there was a lot of people doing a lot of stuff, but there were really no good tools. And I had to develop new tools to actually look at this problem.
That's, again, the engineering mindset. You build a model, and then you make testable applications, so that if this model is true, then doing this and that will lead to this and that. And so have the tools to do that was the regression and healing in the first place. But
and developing what the hell was going on. And if I can build on that, it turned out that it wasn't just healing prenatal events that's important. It was key prenatal events. And the one that mattered, where the organism went through some sort of dramatic change. So what do I mean by that? Conception, implantation, ovulation, anywhere where the cell made a big change. And those were accompanied by peak states.
When lived through trauma-free or healed to that level.
As you might imagine, these sorts of states aren't that common, so that gives you an idea how bad the trauma level is for prenatal, for people in prenatal trauma. But that was the breakthrough, to realize that peak states corresponded to key developmental moments in development. And then the next step was to figuring out how to get people to those key moments to heal them. And we worked out technologies for that by the middle 2000s. In 2002, I made a breakthrough into a new state of consciousness that I'd never encountered before. And it allowed it, it was very interesting. I could see these objects in space all around me 24/7. And I didn't have a clue what I had access, but it was stable. And I figured out ways to induce it in my colleagues, Dr. Adam Weissel at the time, an MD from Israel. He was my number 2 guy. And we worked together trying to understand the state of consciousness I'd acquired. It took us at least 6 months to realize that we were seeing inside of a cell. And and so we had such clarity of vision inside the cell, it was superimposed in our normal vision. We could see it as well as, say, you could see the chair in front of you. And that was a major breakthrough in understanding how peak states worked, because it turned out that there was one particular cell that really mattered. And once we made that breakthrough into realizing that we can see inside the cell, and this one cell really mattered for development, our work in peak states and understanding these weird problems in development that we've been seeing started to fall into place.
This cell, it's like really existing, it's somewhere located, or it's some kind of, projecting cell. I don't know how.
No, it's a real cell.
It's so think of it as a stem cell. You have sperm and egg merging. That cell is, the master cell of the body. All your cells comes from that cell. But we encountered that at a specific moment in time, that's the 4th cell division, that one cell stays the same, unchanged from that moment on. And we believe the
And we call that the primary cell.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it forms soon after conception.
And how come it stays like the whole life? It stays unchangeable. I mean, if to take these concepts of if there is no only one life, so it's some kind of conscious that is unchangeable, or it's referred to our body still, like.
So you're hitting what's called a paradigm problem. We're trained to think that our consciousness is in our brains, right? And that we have to have this incredibly complicated body to have consciousness. And we sort of look at dogs and cats and say, well, they sort of have little brains, so they're not able to talk and stuff like that. But it turns out that biologically, what we found is the primary cell is where consciousness is. That's where we are. It's like all the other cells are a garment that we wear over this particular cell. A better model would be that one cell is the microprocessor, and all the other cells are the hard drive and the monitor and the keyboard. And you know, if you're a different species, you get a different hard drive, you get a bigger one, you get a smaller one, that sort of stuff. But the core one cell, the primary cell, is key, and that's where our awareness is. So when you look at me and you talk to me, you think I'm here in the living room and I'm looking at the Zoom screen or the computer screen. But at the same time, you're in this one cell superimposed on your body experience all at once. But you're born that way. You think it's normal. The insight was to realize that we have actually two things going on. Our awareness inside of a cell superimposed on our awareness in the body in the present. Like that, they're superimposed. And once we realized that was going on, we could start to do really dramatic things in the study of consciousness as well as in the study of biology and disease. We discovered that it's in the cell and it's actually material based, that you can actually see what consciousness is made of. It's a substance. Yeah.
My analytical mind is like in shock, and he tries to understand, can you measure it? Can you see it? Can you touch it? Can you like do something with it?
And the answer is sure. If you had the money, you could do that with sample organisms, for example. What we did, because we didn't have any cash and biology things, was we said, what are the testable implications? In other words, if this fantasy is true, what are the implications? What can we actually do to test the hypothesis? And that's where things really got interesting. Because at that point, it turned out, because we realized that so much stuff was actually inside this cell, that we could intervene with stuff inside this cell using psychological techniques or quasi-psychological techniques, and make changes in the person's health and states of consciousness. So it was exciting because...
Yeah, this is what intrigues most, how you can like influence.
Mm-hmm.
I also truly believe that this connection exists between like physics and psychic, yeah. But you say that you can literally like, I don't know, test it, touch it, and this connection is not a metaphoric. It's really something.
It's a real thing, and
so
you can read about it
right
in our textbooks.
Right now, it's just words between us, right? But what Grant is saying is that you can actually set up an experiment or a test saying, if that is true, then if I do this to that symptom with this client or in myself or whatever, then I should experience this and this happening when I heal this, or when I make something that isn't functioning function, or and that's what we see.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can say, does this cell exist? I mean, from this model perspective, yes. From a microscopic perspective, we haven't done that test in the lab.
Yeah.
So
we're more focused on actually getting results right now.
Applications. So we're using this model and getting the results.
This is true for a lot of things in life. For example, you have a cell phone in your pocket probably, yeah? And it runs off of tiny little people who speak inside the little box, right? Because there's this invisible thing called radio waves, but everybody knows that can't be because you can't taste them or see them or smell them or anything like that. So how do you know it's true that radio waves exist? Well, because of the applications. You can apply that theory of something that you can't sense in ways that make it useful. That's exactly what we're doing with the primary cell. Now you could say, well, we know it's biological, but once you accept that there's maybe the possibility that's there, you can start to do things that are just flat out amazing.
Experimenting with a new process, and that was a test for making it was like a tweak to an existing process, seeing if we could do it in a slightly more advanced way. So I participated in that testing, and I went into this total different way of experiencing the world. For 4 weeks, I was able to stay in that space, but because of some unhealed trauma, like we talked about, I couldn't keep it. So, but for 4 weeks, I experienced myself and other people and the world so different. It was an amazing state. And it showed me essentially that the power of, or whatever you can call this, the strength of the model in saying, if we do this, then the outcome will have this as a result. But it was like, for me, it gave more than that. So I think, and from doing those processes, our model builds. But it was extraordinary. I mean, I had no fear. When I approached people, I felt very compassionate. People were full with, I mean, that there was just no negativity around. It was very profound.
What else did you feel difference? You could feel, I think, much more than the fish in the water. Yeah.
There's a lot of things that fell away. All the things, if you enter a room and you perceive other people, in all kinds of ways that as a fish in water, we're not even aware of that we do. But when it falls away, like it did for me, you go, holy cow, this is amazing. And the way people actually felt me was different. People would come up to me and hug me out of the blue. I mean, and it's because of this interaction that might be negative in some sense between people had fallen away. So that was amazing. I was just sharing back to your story on what are these states or transcendence or whatever you call them. So this was something very different.
And this was based on the primary cell biology model.
Yeah.
Would you like to hear another fun state?
Of course.
Yeah.
So there is one that, I mean, there's so many states, right? But one that is really, really nice, and if we exactly knew what to do, we would definitely be
selling
or having clients give it to people, because it's very profound. It makes relationships so good. So it takes two people to resonate in that state, but we call it the optimum relationship state, and it makes two people be totally on the same path, in the sense of their best. You feel like the other is your best friend. You feel actually that you carry them with you. It's almost like if you touch your skin, you touch them. So it's like very caring and very you're in tune. No trauma. There's no drama. There's just always this feeling best friends and feeling like
co-creating.
Yeah. You want to do things together and create things, build things, go places, and so, and you feel like you have a place to stand. You feel very safe.
And for this, both have to heal their traumas, or it's some process?
Well, I think it happens spontaneously to people, but it's very, very rare, because in this case, both people have to have so little trauma
in that area.
Whatever prenatal event this is, that if you're healed on it, you can have this. So you can, for example, carry that around and not meet anyone that you resonate with, and therefore it will never express really. But then you meet a person where it does, and you can have this.
Yeah.
So actually, it's like two peak states meet and create some other state. Yeah.
Yeah, you can say in a sense, but the state doesn't express itself until it is, you can say, met by the other.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Love that state. It's a great one.
For people, again, who are not connected to research world or to something like this, is there a way to move in this direction?
First, think of it as a new technology. In other words, you've got to...
How we do it, how we approach it.
Yeah.
Is a new technology,
so
because the field has been there
for a long time. So it's very much like watches. Remember watches? You wind them up and they got little gears and everything like that. And then digital watches came out, and those old wind-up things is Spanish. Well, they both tell time, but how they did it was completely different. Conventionally, the way people do states or health, for that matter, is to meditate or pray, or there's just a lot of different things historically that are used, right? We have something completely new and different. It's never been seen in the world before, because this combination of trauma healing and understanding of cells just simply didn't exist. I mean, think about it. Electron microscope wasn't even around before about 50 or 60 years ago. So this new way of solving this problem just wasn't there. The second part is it's fighting uphill with people's preconceptions. So from a scientific viewpoint, it makes total sense to us. But from someone who's already in the field, who's used to the old way of doing things, it's a big leap. Yeah, we find that people who really don't know much are much easier to train and teach because their preconceptions don't get in the way. Having said that, we wanted to mention this. We get a lot of people who come to us and go, we'd like a peak state, please. Like they want to order it off of a menu. And oddly enough, we used to offer that back in the teens, but we stopped doing that because what we discovered was that people were coming to us for a peak state to solve a problem in their life. They weren't just going, oh, I just want to expand and be even more amazing than I am today. No, they were coming to us because they were miserable in some ways. And they looked at that menu and they said, oh, well, if I had that, this misery I have will go away. Yeah. And it turned out that we would then give them whatever state that they asked for, and they would be unhappy. And we would check, and yes, they'd had exactly the state that we had written down that they would get the characteristics for. The reason they were unhappy is because their misery didn't disappear. So they were trying to be not only the self-diagnosis, but the treater person in one go. And it was an utter failure. We gave that up, and what we discovered instead was that people who had had a peak experience, yeah, who could say, you know, I was on that mountain and I felt bloody amazing, and I'd like to have that again. Now, those people were happy. Their experience became a state, continuous.
Mm-hmm.
Because they weren't trying to fix something. They knew exactly what they wanted. So when people come to us now and they say, oh, please give me a state or this or that or the other thing, the first thing we say is, what is it that you're really trying to solve? Is it a relationship problem? Is it some sort of internal pain? Do you have grief and suffering that you're trying to cover over with these other things? Huge way of looking at this problem. And it was empirical. Surprised me. I didn't realize this was going on with people until we'd had a couple of years or 4 or 5 years of this over and over and over problem. You want to expand on that?
Well, I think you said most of it. So what turns out is when people have misery, if you actually do trauma healing with them and fix that pain, then they're happy. That's what they wanted.
Yeah, and they don't give a shit about the state at that point.
Maybe they would, but the pain was the
driver.
They weren't that state actually didn't solve what they thought it would. So
Okay.
and maybe they wouldn't tell us that, oh, I have pain and that's what I really want to solve. Instead, they say, that state, I would really like that. So sometimes don't occur to you yourself what you're seeking before, after a while maybe, and so that would occur to them as they got the state that, I thought then that my blah 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 would go away,
Because
and it didn't.
because remember that Judeo-Christian thing? Any state is sort of goddish. So if I'm goddish, all of this stuff goes away. That is not how it works. Different states give different qualities. It's hard to give people states. It only took 2 or 3 hours. That wasn't the problem. They just weren't happy afterwards. They had the state. It just didn't solve the misery that they were trying to fix.
And again, I'm from psychological background. Is it possible to release all the traumas, because it's like never-ending story? And,
that's where the beauty way is the one that we're focusing on, because it's one thing after the other. Without beauty way, you keep running into trauma, and there's a biological reason for that. That also is described as in the primary cell.
Although optimum relationship does a pretty good job too.
Yeah, but that's also again the state that is in that same category
of unusual state.
My interest also here is to understand what is not transcendent state, what can be mixed. We talked with Mr. Shiny, for example, and he told me you can be in truly creator state, or your mind can trick you and you can think you're like in some trauma, actually, not the peak state. And for example, now this popular topic with psychedelics, with shamanic ceremonies, where you also like your ego dissolves, like you do this MRIs and you see that like this neuroplasticity like increases radically. Are these can we consider it like a peak states?
Are you asking whether the states or whether the experiences people have in those psychedelic or whatever they do?
Yeah. Are they
similar?
Are they really peak states? Yeah. And can they lead to more permanent state, perhaps, these transformations that they experience during this?
In rare cases.
In
rare cases, I think a person can.
Why?
Maybe Grant should answer that, because
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of casualties also in that field.
Yeah. But I've seen casualties from people just doing traditional spiritual practices too. That's where when Groff's book on spiritual emergencies came out, it crystallized a whole understanding that you can screw yourselves up with just normal techniques, let alone hallucinogens. So, to answer your question, when someone says they've gotten a peak state, the first question you should ask yourself is, are they screwed up? For example, when I first saw the person get the over-identification with the creator state, they were going on and on and on how everything was perfect and the world was a great place and things are as it should be. But then I started to notice that there was zero compassion in these people. That if someone was bleeding on the side of the road, they wouldn't stop because everything was right and good and the way it should be, right? And so I knew that something was wrong with that state. And it was years later, once we had the primary cell, that we could realize that it was a dysfunctional state. It had nothing to do with peak states at all, but it was experienced by the person as if it was profoundly transcending and blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't. It was a state of actual ill health. And how would you tell them apart? Well, you look at what are the outcomes. Are these people better human beings? Are they more compassionate, and so on and so forth? But the other way to know is if you understand about the primary cell, you can say, okay, well, what's going on in the primary cell? Is the cell optimum functioning, or is this some sort of weird thing that's happening in the cell that shouldn't be there? So somebody said something.
And how can we understand that the primary cell is functioning optimally?
Well, I think a regular person doesn't have a hope of doing that because you don't have the technology or the training. Kind of like going into my engineering office and say, well, how can I know how to design a chip in my phone?
Mm-hmm.
Well, go to college, get 10 years worth of experience, and like that. It's a learning thingy. It isn't just something that you can pick up like a piece of bread.
But it's true that the field is it's harder to gain understanding full on with what's the real thing and what's something that is experienced as maybe the real thing and is not.
I was commuting to Monday morning to my job as a faculty in electrical engineering. And I was playing some music, and then I started to notice that my chest felt weird. And it was a long commute. And as I focused on this, finally I realized I wasn't breathing. And I hadn't been breathing for at least 10 minutes. I literally was not breathing. My chest was not moving. Air was not going in and out of my nose. And I was driving along perfectly happy. Oh, and the other thing that was happening was I was filled with this incredible sense of peace, like unbelievable. The word peace just doesn't even begin to describe what I was experiencing. Well, I thought this is kind of interesting. And I went in and I started teaching my courses, and I noticed that I would take a breath so I could speak. And then when I didn't need to speak, I just wouldn't breathe. Literally, I was not breathing. And it was maybe the second day or the third day that I noticed that my body would take a very, very tiny little breath every 15 to 20 minutes all by itself, and then I'd stop breathing again. The other problem was that it made me really smart. Now, why is that a problem? Because all of a sudden I could access pretty much all my knowledge, all my understanding of electrical engineering, and I was trying to teach. And what happened is I couldn't judge where the students were anymore. And so I was like going from 2 + 2 = 4 and jumping into E = mc squared in essentially the same breath. I couldn't scale my lessons anymore to judge where the students were at. I don't know what my IQ had jumped to, but it was really high. And so now I'm not breathing, I'm filled with peace, and my IQ is really high, and it's a stable state. So 3, 4, 5 days go by, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it. But I can tell you, if you have to do medical board exams locked in a bank vault without oxygen, it's the perfect state. And eventually I found someone who recognized it, and he called it somebody from the Hindu tradition. And on the 5th day, I said, well, this was really interesting. And I was able to force myself out of the state and back into normal consciousness. Okay? Sounds interesting, doesn't it? Like, wow, transcendent, blah, blah, blah. But it turned out that I was able to analyze what had happened to give me that particular state. And it's a dysfunctional state. It is not a functional, even though it gives you qualities that seem quite amazing. What it was,
valued in traditions.
yes, traditions that say this is what you want, but believe me, you do not want to stay.
Yeah, so this like samadhi, like the yogis, like what try to achieve. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you could have buried me in a box, and I probably would have been fine for days, just in the residual oxygen in the box. But it turned out it was a state you get when you shut down your body and your heart. So in other words, you think of the body and your heart as organelles inside your primary cell. It turns them off. And that's probably why you use so little oxygen. But at any rate, it's a dysfunctional state. You lose your ability to feel compassion or connection, emotional connection. It's great if you want to be a walking head. but you do not want that as an outcome state. So just an example of something that seems very positive, and yet when you understand the biology underneath it, you go, this is not good. The intermediate mechanisms are quite weird. For example, how come almost nobody has beauty way? It took us 25 years to realize what was really causing that problem. And the fix is not obvious.
When conception happens, egg and sperm, they merge. What doesn't go so well in all people without beauty way from our model's perspective is that the awareness of egg and sperm don't merge into one and create a new being, a new life, you can say. But they stay separate within the cell, which makes us as people very split inside. And that's, if you look at Chinese way of thinking, yin yang, and I mean, it's characterized in all cultures that duality, in a sense, exists inside of us. And that is reflected by that. When they do merge, they sort of give up their own identity as female and male, merge, become something entirely new. And that's what creates this feeling of beauty, in a sense, that it's part of it.
Part of it, yeah.
Part of it.
Yeah.
But it's the merging of, so your consciousness is now no longer seeking, which also, if you go back and listen to what Grant said, was one of the characteristics of the state, is that you look to yourself, you look inward for guidance. When that merge is happening, it's like you no longer search, you know within yourself what's right and wrong and it's amazing.
Yeah, spiritual truths are obvious. You wonder why people even talk about it.
You talk spiritual truth. I mean, I think truth is obvious.
Yeah,
in a
that's
sense. I mean,
although
there is a state, that has that we call the truth state. That's different.
So for me, it's like, again, maybe I try to grasp it as I'm not inside sciences, like metaphorically, is that what happens in this initial state, like this, like you say, yin and yang, I don't know, this your feminine and masculine nature, your material and spiritual, they don't like match at initial moment, yeah? And that's why all our whole life we feel splitted, something like this. Yeah,
it's the condition of people. All people not in beauty way. So all of us pretty much.
From our perspective, beauty way is like the entry level to good health. That's why we put such a high priority on solving that problem.
As we speak about like so deep methods, like when we're touching like initial things, is it safe? I mean, to go into some things that really like the base of existence.
Definitely cause yourselves problems.
You can cause a lot of problems to yourself, but you can damage. I mean, you can cause problems to yourself doing spiritual practices, right?
Yeah.
Spiritual emergencies are a clear example of even just walking in normal life, experiences. You can
screw yourself up.
You can activate things. Yeah. So true, if you go trawling around in your primary cell or in your psyche, whatever you call it, sure.
Yeah, you need training. You don't want to repeat all the years of experience that it took us to figure out how to make it safe.
And what kind of diseases you address now, like with?
So we have working treatments of certain diseases like Asperger's and.
I like that one. It really is amazing.
And we work on OCD. We're very far with autism process.
Traumatic brain injury. Yeah, so we've got a lot in the research pipeline. Yeah.
So like you said, people have lots and lots of traumas, and our work can help in eliminating those, one by one kind of cases, and people can definitely improve their lives doing this. But what we've come to realize is that the beauty way state is the one that can eliminate all the problems that you can essentially have.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Emotionally.
We do not have a fix for it yet. That's where our
Yeah.
primary focus has been in the last year.
We want to make an application that is efficient and that also is doable for people.
What fascinates you now in this topic? Where are your efforts now?
So Beauty Way is definitely high on the priority list, solving that, and so also working on major diseases right now.
Mm-hmm. And do you have people who reach this beauty way, like through the process?
We don't have a process.
We don't have a process.
You
That's
don't.
working on to solve how can we do this and how can we make it.
It's a tough problem.
Yeah.
For example, if you solve it, what do you expect?
We'll take people who are in hell and put them in heaven that fast.
But it really sounds like heaven. I mean, this is really
life is worth living.
Yeah.
From that space.
It's probably a good thing people don't ever access Beauty Way because they'd all commit suicide.
If they lost it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would be big time grief of losing something very precious. Yeah. In a sense, I think people have a knowing inside of them that it does exist. I think in everyone there lives a glimpse of this state from early development.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think
kind of the Eden, the Garden of Eden thing.
Yeah, and you can see it in cultures around the globe even before anyone were able to speak across the globe about this. It lives in traditions. The story about Eden, paradise, lost paradise.
It really is.
So there is a reason, I think, why maybe you're on your journey and why people in all over the world are searching or looking and hoping and trying to solve things like similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we were given this glimpse of this to like a start to follow it, and to discover ourselves.
Yeah. But until the technology in the last few years appeared, there just wasn't any way to solve this problem. I don't care if you meditated or you went on the mountains or you fasted, it just didn't help.
Want to experience your model, can they come somewhere, like to your therapist?
Therapists would always ask, what's your symptom? What is it that you want to achieve with coming here? And yes, anyone can approach our therapists and have a discussion on that. And maybe it is a peak experience to peak state that the person needs.
Yeah. But yeah, there's about 60 therapists that have been trained. You can just look them up on the web.
We do a lot of research using ourselves. With diseases, we certainly also involve people with diseases and who would like to be part of our research journey. And so the tools, I mean, we have developed a lot of psychological tools that we use, and the measurement that we run are usually like Grant mentioned before, the subjective units of the stress scale that we use for something has fully, I mean, with a disease, it's easy, right? Does the disease go away? So this is more, the SUT scale is more for emotional and for peak states.
Well, sometimes physical symptoms.
And physical symptoms, yeah.
Should a person somehow, for example, is it valid for kids or the persons who don't believe in any like primary cells or regression techniques or something like this? Should a person somehow be resonating with it, or it doesn't matter?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
In fact, the people who have a background are actually the hardest to work with because they argue with you. Whatever their tradition is, no, you can't do it this way. Well, just do it. Just shut up and just do it.
This actually solves a fundamental issue or a problem when we do our apply a technique to a symptom that we know can solve that symptom. So that actually addresses the actual problem in the cell. So this is not placebo, and you don't need to believe to have a result.
Pay for results as an organization. I don't know if Shane told you about that.
Yeah, Mr. Shane told about it.
If it doesn't cure the problem, it's free. So that's a pretty high bar.
So you're showing what you are doing, yeah. So,
Because
for example, if after 1 year he loses this state, he can come and...
Exactly, yeah. But, you know, as an engineer, we design stuff that doesn't fall apart, right? Your bridge, you do not want a bridge that lasts 3 days and then collapses. That's the kind of mindset that we have towards this work.
The last thing, what you can recommend people who had this glimpse of transcendence and want to discover it like more, or want to experience it more on more permanent basis, what they can do by themselves.
Our solution, of course, would be like we talked about, you know, heal the traumas that are keeping that from being. So if they were on their own, and I don't know.
You need to know what you're doing when you're working with trauma.
I guess it just depends on the state that they're trying to get back. Or whatever, you know, because gratitude is always a good one.
It's in volume 1.
Yeah, so Jacqueline
Aldana?
Yeah, she has this process of gratitude that if you do that every day,
it helps, yeah.
It helps for a certain kind of peaceful gratitude, love feeling. But if your state is accelerating something, I don't know that would help that, you know.
So to answer your question, our work involves trauma and trauma healing. And other people do other things. So Jacqueline isn't part of our institute. She came up with what she calls 15-minute miracle. I highly recommend it. It's in my textbook, first book. Other than that,
and your books, for example, because they describe the states, they even describe some processes. Is it can a person do something by himself, or it's not recommended? Or
some people can be lucky by doing it by themselves, but
but you could get into trouble too. If you don't know how to deal with regular, everyday, horrible post-traumatic stress disorder, this is not the, you do not want to be mucking around. That's one of the problems with hallucinogens, for example. You can take a pill and then you are going somewhere. And it can open up horrendous trauma in a person. And then when the pill wears off, they are in real trouble. Because now this stuff is turned on and it doesn't turn off. You need to be skilled in how to heal stuff like that. I'm just using hallucinogens as an example. What we do in our work is
they could be meditating and encountering something that
exactly
inside of their body gets them.
Or all of a sudden abuse memory comes up, you know, boom.
So that's what we talked about earlier, that you can act.
But if it's still a natural process, it means that the psychic somehow is ready for it, if it's nature.
No, that's not. One of, actually, you have a list in your book about assumptions that people have, is like that only what you're ready for will open for you. And that's not
false.
The case.
Definitely false. People want that comfort, but it doesn't exist.
But still, it's good news that such things exist.
Yeah, and when we have beauty way work, and then the next step is to make it easy, right?